right, welcome everyone. My name is MItch Pryzbocki. I'm a national ambassador for the Logistics Officer Association, and today I'm humbled to introduce our special guest, a Major General retired Howard Brent Baker. Sir, over to you.
Hey, well, Mitch, thanks so much. I'm really super excited to be here this afternoon talking with you and the bigger audience of LOA. I've been associated with LOA, I think, for about 3 or 4 decades. So it's really exciting to get to do this afternoon.
Yes, sir. Well, we can't thank you enough. And we're fortunate enough not only to have a retired senior leader like General B with us, but, sir, your journey was very unique as far as senior leaders go. You refer to yourself as a Mustang. And for members in the audience, both officer and enlisted listening, do you want to share some of your background, your assignments, and kind of your path across your Air Force career?
Sure, I'd love to do that. So I am a Mustang, and a Mustang is a term that's used when you're an enlisted member and become an officer. And so I was really very blessed having an amazing career. I spent 6 years enlisted as an enlisted member, and I did all things fuels or POL. I actually taught the fuel school at Chanute Air Force Base, which is no longer there. It's closed now. And then I went to OTS and transitioned to the Officer Corps. Spent about 31 years doing really all things logistics. Had a variety of assignments, supply, did logistics plans, heavy depot maintenance at Hill Air Force Base. And I was very, again, blessed to be to make the rank or grade of Major General. That's what I retired as. In my last job, I was a vice commander of Air Force Materiel Command, and I have the unique, kind of a unique experience. I actually was a deputy for the first 2 female 4-star general officers in the Air Force. And so I was very, very proud to support them as well. So it's been a really wonderful career. I retired just at 6 years ago, and then I transitioned into the private sector.
Wow. Well, very, very, very cool, very unique experience, sir. But you mentioned the transition to the private sector. What is your current role, and how are you still supporting the warfighter from your current roles and passions?
Sure. Well, so today I actually I landed with a company called PTC, and we really provide industrial software, everything from computer-aided design, product lifecycle management, the Internet of Things, augmented mixed virtual reality, cloud, all the things that you hear about today, digital twin, digital thread. I was very excited to get into that space because I'd done logistics for 37 years, and I really wanted to add another component. And so now being able to do software, it's been really, really exciting. And I run our federal aerospace and defense vertical for the company. So I've got things all aerospace, DoD, military, all OEMs, federal government around the world. So it's a lot of what I've done before, a lot of experience, but now I've added this digital transformation software component, and it's really been very, very exciting.
Yes, sir. So many of us on the call today are very much involved. Anyone listening in to how we modernize as a military?
Yes.
Because unfortunately, a lot of the airmen that we work with now in the current state of the field are using technology that's older than their lifespan. So you mentioned being involved in LOA 30, 40 years. I'm going to throw a dart here and say some of our processes and procedures, our TTPs, if you will, haven't changed very much from the time you were a junior officer to now sitting here retired, more than a half decade. So any thoughts on that or advice on where to light a fire for us to build on, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Brown's, accelerate, change, or lose? Any comments on that for the listeners today?
Well, I would say, first of all, you're spot on. A lot of the systems, the technology, quite frankly, it was being used when I came in. I've served my whole career, retired, and in some cases it's still being used. But I am very proud and excited to say that I think the Air Force is really starting to change. And this digital transformation effort, it's really starting to pick up and accelerate. And I think as a result of COVID, it's like some of the trends we're seeing, I don't think they were necessarily started by COVID, but they've really been accelerated. And it's things like digital transformation, thin client, being able to go into the cloud, different capabilities like that. So those things are really starting to accelerate. Another great example is augmented, virtual, extended reality. A lot of young folks are very comfortable working in this mixed reality world. And so the Air Force is really starting to embrace that. And I would say, because I work across all segments, we're seeing that in the other services. We're seeing that in major OEMs, and we're starting to see that really around the globe. And it's really exciting to see that, because that's the kind of technology that makes a difference for the warfighter. And it's also really good as, older folks get ready to retire and leave the service, younger folks come in, and quite frankly, your generation really embraces technology. So I think we're starting to see quite a few good changes.
Yes, sir. No, thank you for those words, and just realizing when LOA gets together every year, and whoever might be dialing in from this call, we're shattering silos across generations, because you have our newest airmen, our Gen Z. You have some of the junior leaders like myself are millennial. Then you've got the Gen X that kind of is older in the uniform. Then you got some of your nature is still very involved and supportive. Sure. That might be baby boomerish. So we're talking 4 generations of unification. So that's a challenge our leaders in the field face. But want to bring it back to your career as an Air Force officer. I'm sure this was a very challenging assignment when you were the director of logistics for Operation Tomodachi after the Japanese earthquake and tsunami. So if you could share your experience, if you had lessons learned, or where some of these technologies and processes you talked about could have benefited you. Was there ever, a logistician needing more proficiency where they could learn AR, something of that? But just if you could share that experience overseeing such a serious operation that a lot of the world was watching news, nervous was the nuclear fallout, what was going to happen? So if you could just please share some of that.
You bet. That was really an exciting time in my life and my career. It's probably, rank it up there of the top 2 or 3 things I really did across my entire, Air Force career. But it was a very interesting situation. You had one of the world's largest recorded earthquakes, about 9.1, and then you had a tsunami that literally went over tsunami walls. And then, of course, you had the power plant. Subsequently, we knew a meltdown. And so you actually had 3 or 4, and it was a very, very cold winter in Japan. We had about 4 things going on at the same time. But I was very fortunate. I was part of a joint task force called 519 that I had been part of for about 2.5 years at that time in the Pacific. And so I actually mobilized with pretty much my core team when we went to Japan and set up our forward operating unit. And so, again, very interesting time, almost apocalyptic at times. Yeah. The nuclear is very scary because you can't see it, smell it, taste it, hear it. So everybody's wearing Geiger counters around their necks and things like that. But I would say probably 2 or 3 really important lessons I learned. One is to play like you practice. So we had our team, we'd had exercises every quarter. And one thing I really instilled when we got there, I said, we're going to play like we practice. There was a lot of folks saying, we need to change this or change that. And I really held the line. Matter of fact, we even used the same set of slides that we'd use in exercises. We use those in real world and built from there. We stood up our cells, had briefings kind of like we did. And I think that was really beneficial. So I would just tell folks, when you're in a catastrophic situation, to me, one of the key lessons is to play like you practiced. I think that's important. The other thing is, I think having a positive attitude is really important. Matter of fact, I know we're going to talk a little bit about the book I've written. That's one of my key chapters, the importance of being positive. In these situations, nerves are frayed and everybody's working long hours and people get upset and grouchy. And we really made a concentrated effort to be pleasant, very supportive, and that made a huge difference in the end. And then the last thing I would mention is you got to remember, especially in these crisis situations, is that you're taking care of other folks, like the people of Japan, working with the government of Japan, but you can't forget to take care of your own team, because your team is really putting in a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of late nights, long days, all of that. And one thing we did is we actually, after a couple of weeks, we started taking 1 day off a week. And that's not a lot, but of course in a crisis, that's it's kind of unique. But the bottom line is that made a difference for our folks. They weren't as tired. They were able to get basic things like getting your clothes, your laundry done. And it just made a huge difference because, you're going to be in for the long haul. So those are some of the key things that I really learned. And it was amazing as a logistician because we had a 4-star admiral that was in charge of all of Operation Tomodachi, but it was primarily a logistics operation, as you can imagine. And I really learned a lot about logistics. It's very different in the Air Force than it is in the Navy. It's very different than it is across the Joint Command. So I had the medical group under me. I had services. I had contracting. And so it was a really, really large portfolio. But looking back on it now, it again, as I said earlier, it's one of my most rewarding things I accomplished in the military.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you for that. And your message of practicing how you play, I think, ties back into what your previous point was. Hey, if we can get some of these other technological assets in the hands of a warfighter, it won't be new to them using it for the first time when you have that peer-to-peer combat. So thank you for sharing that, sir. But you touched on it. You said you wrote a book. So you tell us about that, sir. What is your title and any reasoning and what inspires you and what can you share with the audience?
Well, I wrote a book, and it was very, very exciting to be able to do that. I've kind of contemplated it for the last, several years. And I had an interesting situation in my life. An aunt of mine, aunt by marriage, she had written a lot of stuff about her and her husband. And we didn't even know she had done that. And after she actually passed, we discovered all this that she had written. And it really inspired me to say, you know what? I need to get busy. I need to do that. And I really wanted to write a book on leadership. And so the title is called Orders from the General, Leadership Advice from a 2-Star General. And I tried to write it so it's applicable to the military, but it really is applicable, I believe, to any field of endeavor. And I like to think it's really unique. I try to use my experience as a 7-time commander, working in the private industry, being an enlisted member, transitioning. I try to capture all what I thought are these lessons learned. And I'm really proud of this leadership book. And I think it's not so much prescriptive as reflective. And I'd like for the reader to be able to read it and then, think about their leadership style and what they're doing in this realm. And the idea is I've always been a student of leadership throughout my entire career. And that I'd like to be able to offer the same thing to other folks that want to learn more about leadership or become even a better leader.
Yes, sir. Well, those of us that have read your book are pretty fortunate you have, and we're going to talk more about it. But I think the big point I want to drive home to everyone here as we make this recommendation is you cross lines, lessons that aren't just applicable to military leaders. Like you touched on, how you can have that military mindset to lead elsewhere. And I recommended the book actually to some of my good friends that are in the sales world, and one of them is selling software development. And we went to Norwich University together, military college academy, and they took that mindset, that discipline, some of those leadership tools to be able to use in the business world. And so I think that's great and where we can expand our audience. But with that said, sir, anyone's professional life, sure, military, we deal with the stress with our deployment tempo and moving every few years. Heck, my daughter's now in her 3rd home and she's 2 years old. But we have stress in our professional lives, so work-life balance is always a challenge. But you did have one chapter in your book where you touch on priorities. And in this order, you said priorities of you, your family, and the job. Any reason for that particular order and how you learned that lesson, sir?
So it's an interesting story, and I kind of hate to say it. I think I even say this in the book. I kind of learned this later in life and later in my career, which I'm not necessarily proud of that fact. But so when I was assigned to the Joint Staff, a very senior officer pulled me into the office and gave me the old, the speech that we all hear. And he told me this. He said, Brent, I want you to take care of you. I want you to take care of your family. And then if you do those 2 things, I know you'll do a great job of taking care of the job. And I had heard similar speeches before from other leaders, but their actions didn't always match what they had told me. But this was the opposite. This very senior leader on the Joint Staff, he really lived by this principle. This is a guy I would see that would go out and run 3 miles and then change clothes and go into the tank with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, having family get-togethers at the Pentagon, which is very unusual. He just really lived it. And it struck me, and it it ingrained in me that mindset. And, the things he told me, he said, Brent, you have to take care of you. I mean, you're unique. You're a unique individual. You got to eat right. You got to get your rest. You got to, stay hydrated. You got to do all those things. You can't be stressed. You got to take care of yourself. And then he said, when your career is over, at the end of that receiving line, it's going to be your family. And so, it's like two balls. Your job ball can drop and hopefully it bounces, but your family ball, it's made of glass. And if you let it drop, it shatters. And then so I really changed my philosophy about myself, then the family, and then really the job. And I will tell you, there's some unintended consequences. I think he knew that when you prioritize things like that, you actually do a better job in the profession that you're in. And so I've always kind of tried to live from that point forward, really kind of live by those priorities.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that personal insight. With that said, in the book, you also touch on the aspect that you said that there's little magic or luck when making a general officer. So obviously, you did share with us that you learned that lesson later in life on the prioritization. You don't get to a high level if you don't perform. So it kind of builds into the other question. And I think we can start to do what we can do, the listeners on the line, to help members in our ranks feel comfortable putting their family first. But what were some of the things you did to help achieve general officer? If you have lower ranking officers listening in today, any advice for them that kind of keeps in mind what you just talked about, but also there's no magic. What do you do?
I think one of the first things you can do is to really write out your career and maybe even your life plan. I tell folks that all the time because I try to do a lot of mentoring. And it's very difficult to mentor someone if you really don't know where they're trying to go in their career and life. And so one advice I really give to young folks is kind of write out what you want to do in your career. Now, it'll change. Things change all the time. But my point is, if you want to be a general officer, and that's, maybe you want to be a CEO of a company, there's things that you have to do to make yourself eligible. It doesn't mean you'll make it, but you kind of have to have those basic things done. And then that's where some of the little magic, comes in play. But some of those basic things that you have to do. Now, again, if you're not interested in being a general officer, you're going to do 20 and, do something completely different. Well, then that's a different kind of career path. But, in my case, I always did those things to make myself competitive. I took the tough jobs. I tried to, be in command, different locations. I got my PME done, professional military education. Sometimes I had to do that twice, but I got all of that done. I tried to do the things that make myself competitive. And then that way, if that opportunity presented itself, I was prepared to do that. I think sometimes people, maybe they want to try to achieve, a high rank in the military, but they don't really plan that out. You have to do some planning, because I like to tell folks, people don't plan to fail, they fail to plan. So I think you got to kind of lay some of those basics out to make yourself competitive for whatever role you want to go into.
I think it's a pretty powerful quote. Don't plan to fail, fail to plan. So thank you, sir. Well, I'll definitely keep that in mind too. But with that said, one of the unique things of the Logistics Officer Association, we get mentorship from senior leaders such as yourself. And it's fantastic that people are able to tell us these kind of what to do's and not to do's, and never close that door. But as far as the ability, since you've lived at that all these different levels, I mean, heck, from the fuels airman, out there on shift, to hey, the logistician leader that was leading the joint world, we were talking about different things under you. Any advice to how to connect it in the middle? So maybe that middle rank, captain major type or squadron commander type, how do you connect the strategy? And we see our defense mindset shift to peer-to-peer, and we know the new NDS, what's specifically going to call out. So with that mindset of shift, how do you connect the tactics to the strategy? Any advice for that, sir?
It's a great question. It's kind of an age-old question, quite frankly. But I think there's a few ways. One is being very aware and smart and educated on what that strategy is. This is one thing I think a lot of our junior officers do better today than maybe what we did in my generation. But you got to really stay smart on what is the strategy at the national level, to the military level. I think you have to really understand and grasp that. So you got to get educated on that. And then the other mistake I think a lot of folks make is they don't see how what they're doing technically really supports that. And I would say the way you really improve that is to ask yourself that question: how is what I'm doing day to day support that strategy? It's very interesting. Some of the things that we're doing today as a nation really kind of started out as tactical operations. A great example is this small package deployment. That was done several years. Bases have done that for years. 3 or 4 airplanes deploying, in a package of kits and, taking care of the fuels and things like that. That's very tactical, but that's flowed up to some strategy that our country is using today. So, to me, you have to be educated. You have to know what the strategies are. Think about how you tie yourself, your day-to-day job into that strategy. And then what I always like to tell folks, it's kind of an old-timer saying, but it's to bloom where you're planted. I'm a firm believer there are no, small jobs or bad jobs. And whatever job you're asked to do, if you really look at it, you can really see how important that job is and how it has a tactical aspect, but it's also very, very important for the operational and even the strategic mission of our service.
Thanks again, sir. That's again something I think we can all chew on and go back, look in the mirror, and focus on our respective areas of responsibility. With that other point on knowing what's going on and educating ourselves of the world, and you're still very much involved from your industry job or private sector job. You talked about Internet of Things before, so a lot of what you're doing to help us does help face some of our peer level challenges, whether it's the China, Russia, but mostly that Indo-PACOM focus with the threat in the Pacific. But where do you see after coming up from the ranks and when there was a Soviet Union, when there was a Cold War, but now with what you're doing with your job, to how do you support a now technological, more advanced adversary than the Soviet Union was? I mean, if you just want to look gross domestic product, what China has is far greater than anything the Soviets ever had during the heyday. Yeah. So where do you see us going, and what are your thoughts and reflections and maybe advice you can share? But where do you see parallels and where do you see areas we got to work?
I think there are a lot of parallels. So as I grew up, and of course, through my career, most of my career in the Air Force, we had a near peer or equal peer competitor in the Soviet Union. Of course, that dissolved, and then we had Russia. And so now you look, we've got maybe 1 or 2 near peer competitors, definitely China rising. And so I see a lot of parallels there on, are they expanding? What's our strategy against them? Hypersonic missiles is always in the news, a lot of discussion about that as well. And so I do think there are a lot of similarities. One thing I do think is different is technology now, the capability of the technology that we have at our hands, quite frankly, I think is significantly different than we had during those Cold War days. And I think that's a great benefit if we utilize it properly. And I like to tell folks there's the old OODA loop, if you've ever heard of the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. And I really think that technology, especially things like the Internet of Things, digital twin, AR, VR, all the different things we mentioned earlier, that's a way to get inside your enemy's OODA loop. Because really the whole idea of digital transformation is taking disparate data and turning it into useful information. And so I can't think of another way that would be better to get inside your enemy's OODA loop is to have, useful information. And I think that's what some of these technologies bring. So I'm very positive on the future. I really am. I think, we're postured very well. We do have to, I think, wake up. We've been at a, maybe low intensity conflict and the war on terror and things like that for years. And that seems to kind of be changing now to more of a peer versus peer conflict.
Yes, sir. Appreciate that optimism, and it helps us all get out of bed every morning and do our jobs for those of us that are putting on a uniform. But point with that, though, sir, you talked about, I really like how you said we can get into the enemy's OODA loop with this technology, as we can reach out and touch them, and I think that's great. But the ability to harness that will still come from leaders, and that's what's different than if you look at a China versus U.S. comparison, right? what does the NCO Corps have in the U.S. military versus, more of an authoritative, less, I don't want to say less free thinking. So with that free thinking, development to the self has got to be huge. And you touched on it in an earlier point, and you saw your leader put you as first, and you, your family. So with that said, I think your book can really help us analyze ourselves, how to be better, how to enhance our team, how to develop a team that has sharp, free thinkers ready to lead, and take that military mindset to whether it's military or industry. So huge tool that's going to help us in peer-to-peer competition. Where can people buy your book, sir? Is it available on Audible, or is there a link? Is there anywhere we can go?
Well, here's what it looks like if you can see it. I'm really excited about it because I've really tried to write this in such a way it's kind of ageless or timeless lessons. And again, I wrote it in kind of a free, easy to read, and I give a lot of good examples and bad examples. And as I said earlier, the idea is to really to read it, study it, reflect on your own leadership. But you can. There's a few places you can get it. It was published by Ex Libris, which is just XLIBRIS. So you can go to xlibris.com. You can actually go to my website, which is basically my name, Brent Baker Senior.com. You can order it off there. And of course, you can always go through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, places like that. Again, I want folks to understand that my motivation behind this, it's not money, it's leadership. I want to help train and kind of educate the next group of leaders that are coming up.
Thank you, sir. And again, we're humbled here as a Logistics Officer Association to have you and your willingness to support these leaders coming up. And that's why I think your book is such a great tool for us in the challenges we're going to face with this generation of military leaders, or multi-generations, like we said before. So is there any other way besides going to Amazon, buying your book, any other way to reach out and learn from you? Are you any social media or any platforms?
My biggest social media that I do is LinkedIn. I do a lot of stuff out on LinkedIn because I'm still obviously working for a company, so I have to be very careful in the social media area. I'm a vice president in a company, but LinkedIn is a great way to reach me. You can also email me. It's very simple. It's just hbrent.baker@gmail.com. I respond to all my emails, and I'd love to mentor somebody or any discussions you want to have. I promise you it'll just be between us.
Just priceless. That kind of support is priceless. So thank you again, sir. I don't know if you have any closing remarks for the audience, but we can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you so much, Mitch. Thanks for this interview. I'm always proud to say I'm a member of LOA. I'll be at the LOA event coming up next year. Really excited about that. And I'm proud to call myself a logistician. I really mean that. And I just want to say thanks for your service, everybody that's still serving. And as a retiree, we really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for your time. Look forward to seeing you at LOA.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Yes, sir.